Suitland is an incorporated census-designated place in Prince George County, Maryland, in the United States. Suitland is a wonderful area to raise a family because of its tranquility and urban-suburban mixed feel. The liberal citizens of Suitland frequently spend their weekends in the town's well-known parks. Suitland is a beautiful place, but in contrast, the crime rate is much higher than the average for all American communities, regardless of its size. Sadly, a horrible crime occurred in Suitland in 1979 when a young mother was kidnapped and brutally murdered, leaving her devoted family behind. On March 20, 1951, Vicki Lynn Belk was born into the family of Lonnie and Maydell Belk. Vicki, the eldest of the 6 Belk siblings, was a devoted big sister to April, Grenda, Judy, and Kay, as well as her younger brother, Lonnie Jr., who goes by Ricky. Vicki grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, along with all of her siblings. Following their parents, Lonnie and Maydell's successful lawsuit against the Board of Education school desegregation ruling, Vicki and her sister Judy became the first African-American students to attend the Minnie Howard Elementary School in Alexandria, Virginia. Vicki later graduated from T.C. Williams High School in 1969. Vicki grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. The Belk family was a family that always stood by their values and was prepared to defend the rights of their community and family. The Belk family persisted in being role models for everyone in their community and for one another, even after suffering violence and losing a few fights. Like her family, Vicki also took a strong interest in speaking out and defending her neighborhood. Vicki's thoughtful and giving nature made her a role model for her siblings. Vicki became the first person in her family to graduate from college during a period when she and her community were rarely given opportunities. In 1974, Vicki graduated from St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a Bachelor of Arts in Education. Her diligence and proficiency in her chosen field paid off, as she was hired as a management analyst in the Department of Agriculture's Office of Operations and Finance in Washington, D.C. Vicki, a 28-year-old woman, was juggling parenting her young son, Lyman Belk, and her job in Washington in 1979. She remained active in her community, working as a Sunday school teacher and church clerk at Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria, which Vicki's great-grandfather, Wesley Casey, co-founded. Vicki's family maintained regular communication and was very close to one another. Vicki's entire family came together to celebrate Judy's marriage at the Oakland Baptist Church in early August 1979. Vicki went to the wedding with James Hill, her co-worker turned boyfriend. Vicki assisted with much of the event's planning and served as Judy's maid of honor. A few days after Judy's wedding, Vicki returned to her regular life with her boyfriend, James Hill, who worked for the Agriculture Department. Vicki and James got ready for the day on August 27, 1979, as they usually did. From their Prince George's County apartment, they took a ride in James' 1972 Buick to the Stadium Armory Station, where they parked the car and took the train to their offices. That day, Vicki had some errands to run and planned to finish them after lunch. She told James she would see him in the parking lot after work that evening. James arrived at the parking lot after finishing work and discovered that Vicki was nowhere to be found. The car was still gone. James waited until dusk and became concerned when Vicki was nowhere to be found. He tried calling some of Vicki's close friends and family members that evening to see if they had any information about her whereabouts, but nobody had any idea. James waited for Vicki for hours after getting home, but she never showed up. When James attempted to report his girlfriend Vicki missing to the Prince George's County Police Department early on August 28, 1979, the officials informed him that an official report could only be filed 72 hours after Vicki's disappearance because she was an adult. All James could do was wait and hope Vicki would come back. James informed Vicki's family of the news. They became very concerned, especially Maydell, Vicki's mother. She went crazy because she was unable to comprehend what was happening. It was unusual for Vicki to not check on her son, and it was not like her to not call or let her loved ones know where she was going. Now that her fearless daughter was gone, Maydell could only fear the worst. Vicki's family endured a very agonizing 72 hours of waiting, and as the day wore on, they realized something was seriously wrong. A local teenage boy discovered something strange in the woods on August 29, 1979, while out for a bike ride on Metropolitan Church Road, which is close to Route 227 in Maryland. Upon closer inspection, he discovered it was a dead body. After riding his bike home, he told his mother about the horrific discovery, and she contacted the police. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered a dead woman who was only partially clothed and had been shot in the head. After being taken to Baltimore's chief medical examiner, the woman's body was identified as Vicki Lynn Belk. Homicide was declared the cause of death. Vicki's parents, Maydell and Lonnie, received a call from the Charles County Sheriff's Office, informing them that they needed to come to the police department as they had some information about their daughter. On their way to the police station, Lonnie and Maydell were actually pretty upbeat. They believed that perhaps Vicki had just been injured and had since been located. But the most terrible news was delivered to Maydell and Lonnie when they got to the sheriff's office. Their oldest daughter, who was also their firstborn child, had been killed and abandoned by the side of the road. Maydell instantly started crying uncontrollably because she was in too much pain. She cursed the man who had done this to her daughter. Vicki's family was overcome with grief. They were severely traumatized by the violent and chaotic nature of the crime. After gathering themselves, they handed the case over to the detectives in the hopes that Vicki's killer would be apprehended and dealt with fairly. An inquiry into the killing got underway. The crime scene had already been secured, and detectives were continuously gathering evidence and looking for clues. Vicki's brown shoes, pantyhose, jewelry, bra, and slip-in dress were among the items the investigators found. They also found some hair samples and nail clippings. Despite being tested several times, the items discovered at the crime scene proved to be of little use to the investigators. Vicki's relatives, co-workers, and those in the vicinity of the crime scene were all questioned by the detectives during their numerous interviews. Nothing seemed to be happening with the investigation, not even after some leads were followed up on. Vicki had taken James's car to run errands the day before she vanished, and the detectives were still searching for it in the hopes that it would contain information that would help them find Vicki's killer. James's Buick was eventually discovered abandoned in Washington, D.C. within a few days. Unfortunately, though, the murderer's trail was completely erased. Despite the lack of fresh information in the case, the detectives were committed to identifying Vicki's killer. They kept all of the evidence in the hopes that it could be retested with more sophisticated technology. In an attempt to identify Vicki's killer and bring him to justice, Charles County detectives collaborated with the Maryland State Police, Bode Technology in Loudoun, Virginia, and Sorensen's laboratories in Salt Lake City, Utah, over the course of the following few years as more and more cutting-edge technologies were being introduced. However, they were once again met with failure. The investigation into Vicki's assault and murder gradually came to a standstill as more time passed, and the identity of her killer remained a mystery. Vicki was killed in 1979, and at the time, DNA samples could not be tested due to lack of equipment or technology. The 1980s saw the birth of the technology as law enforcement began compiling a sizable database of fingerprints and DNA samples from suspects of crimes across the nation. When DNA testing became a little more sophisticated in the early 2000s, investigators in Vicki's case retested the evidence. When Vicki's dress was examined again, it turned out to have a foreign bodily fluid on it. This allowed the investigators to create a profile of a possible suspect. Nevertheless, there was still much room for improvement in testing technology, so the created profile was unfit to be added to any database or compared to any suspects. Years went by, and the investigators continued to use new technology to repeatedly test Vicki's possessions that they had discovered at the crime scene. When Vicki's slip and dress were retested using forensic technology in 2022, the detectives were able to create a DNA profile of a male whose bodily fluids were found on Vicki's dress. This gave law enforcement some hope that Vicki's murderer would be apprehended and imprisoned. The newly created male profile was compared to profiles in CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. The forensic team meticulously examined several profiles before discovering a match in their database. The owner of this profile was Andrew Taylor, a 61-year-old man. When the results were communicated to the sheriff's office in November 2022, investigators made the decision to delve deeper into Andrew's past, including his criminal record. At the time, Andrew, who is now elderly, was residing in a Washington, D.C. nursing home and rehabilitation center. By monitoring him closely and persistently obtaining information about his background, the detectives discovered that Andrew had resided in his aunt's Charles County house at the time of Vicky's murder. Vicky's body was discovered less than 4 miles from the house, but this information wasn't enough to nab Andrew. To establish his role in the horrifying murder, the investigators still required more substantial evidence. To do this, investigators obtained a warrant for Andrew's arrest in March 2023 and entered the assisted living facility where he was staying. Detectives needed more proof, so they confronted Andrew and took a sample of his saliva to compare with the DNA from the crime scene again. The unexpected visit made Andrew aware that he was under suspicion for Vicky's murder, but given his current state of health, the detectives were not concerned that he would run out of town. Authorities knew he was staying put, even though the lab tests would take weeks to complete and results would not be available. Andrew's health was rapidly deteriorating and he could hardly perform any activities due to his amputated leg. On June 16, 2023, the DNA match with Andrew's profile was confirmed once more. He was charged with first-degree murder and assault. On June 22, 2023, he was arrested and ordered held without bond. Vicky's family and the detectives who worked on her case addressed the media in a press conference. Vicky's family was inconsolable, living through the past as the investigation's findings evoked painful memories. Judy Belk remembered her late sister by sharing her favorite memory, while Vicky's son, Lamont Belk, thanked the police. Vicky's brother, Ricky Belk, described what happened to his mother after the tragic event. It is unclear at this time whether Andrew has entered a plea. He is being represented by the Maryland Public Defender Office, which declined to comment on the matter. Vicky was unfamiliar with Andrew, and his assault on her was unplanned. Andrew was just 18 when he committed the horrible act. Vicky was robbed of her opportunity to lead a fulfilling life. The people who loved her were deeply saddened by her death, but they also felt some relief and closure now that her killer was in prison. Vicky's son, Lamont Belk, joined Cobb County, Georgia's assistant director attorney after earning degrees from George Mason University School of Law and Morehouse College in 2009. Kay, Vicky's sister, is a retired surgeon from the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office in California. The lone boy among numerous sisters, Lonnie, holds a lieutenant position in the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. In 1980, following Vicky's untimely death, the Belk family established the Vicky Belk Scholarship Foundation to pay tribute to Vicky and offer scholarships in her name. The scholarship board's job is to help raise money for graduating seniors at Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, the church where Vicky Lynn Belk was baptized, and to offer opportunities that carry on her legacy. Through the scholarship program, approximately 100 students from Oakland Baptist Church have received awards thus far. Vicky's family wants to perpetuate her passion for learning in Oakland Baptist Church youth.
After a brief period of time spent alone at home, a girl vanished from sight. It was hard to imagine that anything like that could have happened in real life. So what happened next felt more like a detective thriller than a true crime. When the truth was eventually revealed after 15 years, everyone was horrified. On May 2, 1982, Jessica Disson was born in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a small American town. It was a peaceful community where most people knew one another well and were engaged in farming. Jessica helped her parents look after their 2 younger brothers while they were at work from a young age. Jessica became more self-sufficient as a result, and her parents could always count on her. In order to pay for her first car, at the age of 15, she started working a part-time job at a nearby restaurant. A few years later, she had saved up enough cash to fulfill her dream of owning a red Pontiac. Jessica had good grades, despite working a part-time job, and she began to plan to go to college to become an accountant after graduation. When Jessica, then 17 years old, started her senior year in the fall of 1999. She also began dating a boy, which made her very happy. Her day started out normally in the morning, on Friday, September 10th. While Jessica was still asleep, her parents left for work, her younger brothers left for school, and went to the bus stop. Jessica stayed at home and was expected to take her car to school shortly after her brothers. When her mother got home, sometime around noon, she noticed something strange right away. Jessica was supposed to be in class, but her car was parked in front of the house. The mother went to her daughter's room after entering the home. When Jessica was not in her bedroom, her first assumption was that she might have overslept and missed school. The mother then speculated that Jessica might have called her father to see if he could give her a ride to school. When she called him, he replied that he had left for work by himself that morning. The mother attempted to start Jessica's car with a spare key she had taken from the house, thinking there might be a problem with it. But as she got closer to the vehicle, she noticed an unsettling scene. First of all, the driver's door was ajar. Secondly, and perhaps more concerning, Jessica's phone was resting on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen. One of Jessica's shoes and her keys were under the front seat, and her work clothes, purse, and textbooks were in the back seat. The mother assumed the worst right away. It was obvious that someone had opened Jessica's phone to dial 911 but had stopped short. Furthermore, it is clear that Jessica could not simply leave her belongings in the car and drive away. She would have needed to walk several miles along the road because the family lived on the outskirts of town. Jessica's parents discovered that their daughter had not shown up for class when they called the school. The school should have informed them about this, but for some reason it hadn't. A few hours later, Jessica's parents received a call from Jessica's best friend at the restaurant where they worked, informing them that Jessica had not arrived for her shift, which further alarmed them. Jessica's parents decided to call the police after becoming concerned about her absence from school and work, as well as the fact that her belongings, including a phone with 911 dialed, had been left in an unlocked car. But the sheriff just said that Jessica probably wandered off and would come back sometime. He did not even seem to notice that she could not go very far without one of her shoes because it was left in the car. Jessica's parents begged the sheriff to launch an investigation because they thought their daughter might be in danger, but he refused, so they were forced to go back home. Following that, Jessica's parents made the decision to act independently. Despite reaching out to friends, family, and acquaintances, nobody had reported seeing her. They began looking for Jessica together all over the town, but she was nowhere to be found. Her parents returned to the sheriff the following morning to inform him that Jessica had not returned home. He sent 2 officers to check her car this time, but their parents were now dealing with a second issue. The officers touched everything inside the car with their bare hands as they looked over it without wearing gloves. Jessica's room was not checked by them, despite the fact that it was standard procedure. Jessica's parents attempted to seek assistance from the local media by bringing attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of interest. After being let down by law enforcement once more, they started their own search and started handing out flyers with information about Jessica, along with family and friends. Leading the search were Jessica's father and his brother, Stanley, who was familiar with the area. They made the decision to search the area around a nearby river out of fear for the worst. Because of its overgrown and remote location, the area had a bad reputation and was frequented by local drug dealers and other criminals. Jessica's family searched the rough terrain by the river for hours, without finding any sign of her. A very strange thing happened the following morning. Jessica's parents were at home with their son, who was playing in the yard. He hurried inside after hearing what he thought was his sister's voice calling for assistance. Grabbing his shotgun, Jessica's father hurried outside to try and find the source of the cry. Simultaneously, his brother arrived at their residence and promptly joined the search. They saw something soon after. David Brooks, their 40-year-old neighbor, had smoke rising from his property. They saw him burning what appeared to be clothes on his land as they got closer. Because of the suspicious appearance, Jessica's father requested permission from Brooks to search his farm. But Brooks declined, requesting that they depart. There were other strange aspects about Brooks as well. His family and Jessica's relatives had a regular relationship up until Jessica vanished. But not long afterward, Brooks started acting strangely. He began driving past their house slowly, on a regular basis, while grinning menacingly at them. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from an unidentified man who just breathed heavily without saying anything. They had a suspicion that Brooks was responsible, but they were unable to fathom his actions. Jessica's parents made the decision to talk to the police again after seeing Brooks burn clothes on his land. The police had initially shown little interest in the case. They agreed after the family shared their observations and requesting that police bring cadaver dogs to Brooks. The dogs found the fire pit on Brooks's property after tracking Jessica using her clothes, but no significant evidence was discovered. In one of the sheds, the dogs also found black gloves, indicating the presence of a decomposing stench. Even though Brooks continued to act suspiciously during the search, the police were unable to link him to Jessica's disappearance and left empty-handed. Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI after being let down by the police. Normally, the Bureau declines to become involved in an investigation based only on calls from the families of missing individuals. But on this occasion, they made the decision to do so right away. After conducting extensive research and considering the unsettling information provided by Jessica's parents, the FBI came to the conclusion that something genuinely horrifying may have happened to Jessica. After that, a thorough investigation got underway, one that the local police had been hesitant to carry out. Fingerprints from Jessica's car and room were gathered by FBI agents. They also seized all potential evidence for analysis and sent it all to the lab. Additionally, the investigator coordinated a thorough ground search with the help of helicopters and volunteer recruitment. They thought that maybe Jessica's body was in the pond near her house, so they looked all over the bottom. After thoroughly searching Brooks's farm, FBI agents discovered something extremely concerning. They discovered a printed picture of Jessica inside one of the sheds. Detectives were almost positive that Brooks had some sort of involvement in her disappearance following this unsettling discovery. Joseph, his 35-year-old brother, was also a suspect because of his peculiar behavior during the police search of his property. During the search, something went wrong. Investigators concentrated all of their efforts on the search in the area, nearly certain that Jessica had died, since they could not find any evidence strong enough to bring the brothers to justice. 17 days after her disappearance, on September 27, the police got a call. While driving beside the river where Jessica's father had first looked for her, a woman noticed something odd next to a tree off the road and decided to investigate. As she got closer, she noticed it resembled a human body and immediately dialed 911. When the FBI agents got there, they did in fact discover a young woman who was missing a few fingers and limbs and was dead. Detectives came to the conclusion that she had been sexually abused because she had a rope tied around her legs with paint traces in red and silver, and some of her clothes were missing. The decomposition was so advanced that they were unable to positively identify it as Jessica. After visiting her home, the policeman asked her parents for assistance in identifying her. Jessica's mother concurred, but her father found it difficult to look at his dead daughter. When she arrived at the scene, she was initially unable to identify her, but soon realized that the small butterfly tattoo on her body was in the exact same location as her daughter's. Subsequently, medical professionals established the deceased's identity and concluded that strangulation was the cause of death. Her body was also covered in numerous bruises. The most shocking discovery was that Jessica had been alive for about 3 days after going missing, even though experts had determined that her limbs and fingers were detached post-mortem. indicating that she was still alive at the time. It implied that although the police had a chance to save her, they did nothing at all to do so. The FBI decided to re-interview Brooks following the body's discovery, and this time they discovered something new. Brooks initially told the FBI that he had seen Jessica the morning she disappeared, when they had first spoken. In the second interview, he altered his account to claim that he had not seen her at all that day. He said he was at home that morning in bed with his wife, and she had given a different account of her husband's testimony when the detectives questioned her. Even though there was no such evidence, the FBI persisted in questioning Brooks, asking him what he would do if they discovered his fingerprints on the victim's body. Brooks's response was very suspicious. He said that in that scenario, he would have to admit everything. The FBI chose to arrest him and proceed with the trial after he failed a polygraph test. They knew that, since they had not discovered any conclusive evidence connecting Brooks to the murder, the likelihood of a guilty verdict was minimal. All they had was unsettling, albeit circumstantial evidence of his involvement. The detectives kept working the case and looked for any more evidence. While preparing for the trial, investigators remembered another intriguing detail. Something like the rope that was used to bind the victim's legs was discovered when searching Brooks's vehicle. But no DNA samples were discovered on it, so this is just more circumstantial evidence. Start of the trial was in January 2003. Brooks's attorney maintained that there was no evidence at all and asserted his client's innocence. During the trial, another thing was revealed. Investigators discovered the victim's missing limbs in close proximity to the body when they found it. After putting them in designated containers, they gave them to the neighborhood police. They allowed the boxes to decompose extensively at room temperature, disregarding labels that advised storing them in the refrigerator. Therefore, even in the unlikely event that there was any evidence such as possible DNA traces from the murderer, it was lost as a result of this mistake. The other circumstantial evidence against Brooks was not strong enough. Ultimately, the man was released because the jury was unable to come to a unanimous verdict. State statutes said that he could only face new charges in the event that fresh evidence surfaced. This was a devastating blow to Jessica's parents. They were nearly certain that Brooks was responsible for the death of their daughter. Furthermore, their daughter might have been saved if the police had taken their duties more seriously. Thus, they ultimately gave up on getting justice. This case was not resolved in the ensuing years and was eventually nearly completely dropped. Lynn Hunt, a new detective, started working with the local police force in 2012. She was tasked with investigating unsolved cases, and she was drawn to Jessica Dison's murder right away. She was horrified to see how careless her predecessors had been after reading through the case files. The majority of the documents contained numerous mistakes, lacked any mention of discussions with the parties concerned, and improperly documented the evidence. To put it another way, it was handled so poorly that she was forced to essentially begin the investigation anew. Her first move, 13 years after the murder, was to get in touch with Jessica's family. She was given a box containing Jessica's possessions from her car by one of her brothers, who is now an adult and lives apart from his parents. Ever since the police gave the family back these items, he had held onto it. Hunt was astounded once more at how heedlessly her colleagues had handled the evidence and neglected to store it in accordance with protocol. It was unlikely that these things would help her now after many years. Still, she examined everything she could find with diligence. She soon found out a fascinating detail. It was the report from Brooks's medical examination among the documents. It said that he had an extremely low IQ of only 61. This sparked questions about all police activities, including questioning Brooks. He may not have fully understood most of the questions and may not have provided adequate answers due to his significantly low IQ. All of this made Hunt wonder if the man had anything to do with the case at all, since his strange behavior could just as easily have been caused by his extremely low IQ. Hunt then started to speculate, as to who else might have killed this person. She did a thorough investigation on every person connected to the case or residing nearby. This continued until September 2014, which was almost 15 years after Jessica's passing. A departmental colleague called Hunt with some interesting information. An inmate at a Kentucky state prison asserted that he knew Jessica Dison's killer's true identity. Hunt was a little skeptical about this lead. When prisoners wanted to provide the police with information, it usually ended in disappointment and wasted time. Many of them merely make up stories to get early release or better treatment while incarcerated. Nevertheless, she realized that she had to follow up on this lead to ensure it was genuine. She went to see the man who was supposed to have the information at the prison. He claimed that for a while, he and another person convicted of the same charged child abuse shared a cell. The two grew close on this common ground and occasionally shared information about their crimes. The cellmate informed him one day that he had killed Jessica Dison, among other things. The detective was shocked when the informant then dropped a bombshell, revealing this man's name. It was Jessica's uncle, Stanley Dison, her father's brother. The informant claims Stanley admitted to him that while Jessica was residing in their home, he had sexually abused her for a number of years. If she ever discussed it, he threatened to kill her or someone close to her. When Jessica got a boyfriend in the spring of 1999, Stanley became concerned that she would eventually confess to him about the abuse she had received from her own uncle. Jessica was home alone on September 10th when Stanley showed up in the morning. After loading all of her belongings into her vehicle, she went outside. Jessica resisted Stanley's demands that she end her relationship with her boyfriend, threatening to expose him if he did not leave her alone. She reached for the phone to try to dial 911 as he began to threaten her. Jessica managed to escape Stanley's attempt to grab her and escaped inside the house. Before bringing her to an abandoned shed close to where her body would eventually be discovered, the man followed her to her room, struck her, and bound her in her sheets. After torturing and mutilating her for several days, Stanley killed her, moved her body to a prominent spot close to the road, and buried the sheets beneath the shed. He added that he amputated a few of the victim's limbs in an attempt to fool the police into believing drug traffickers were responsible for the murder. Detective Hunt came to the conclusion that the informant could not have made this detail up because only Jessica's closest relatives were aware of the missing limbs. Finally, he mentioned that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe next to the shed, under a broken tree. Hunt made the decision to confirm all of the details regarding the hidden evidence. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives who agreed to help with the search because no one from the local police department could assist her due to staffing shortages. She chose to wait to inform them that Stanley might be the murderer in order to gather proof for these startling claims. They did not find any hints on the first day of the search. They dug in the areas that fit the informant's description in the pouring rain, but they got nothing. Hunt and Jessica's brother went back to the location the following day. They started excavating the soil inside the abandoned barn he had indicated to them along the way, and almost instantly a long-awaited breakthrough occurred. A bedsheet that had been buried was found. Hunt got the evidence and raced over to Jessica's place. Her parents had not altered her room in all these years. It was just the way it had been since the day their daughter disappeared. This allowed Hunt to verify that the discovered bedsheet was a piece of Jessica's bedding. The other linens had the same pattern, but it was absent from the bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was taken into custody and questioned right away. Despite looking visibly shaken during the conversation with the detectives, he refused to confess to the crime. He was eventually accused of murder, and the matter went to trial. The fact that his brother had done such a horrible thing to his daughter was beyond shocking to Jessica's father. He went through a period of total denial before accepting this intolerable truth. He later remembered that Stanley had suggested looking for Jessica's body near the river in the early days of her disappearance. but he became ill during the search, so his brother drove him home. As it turned out, Jessica was found only a few hundred yards from the barn where this had occurred, indicating that Stanley may have purposefully misled them into thinking she was still alive. Detective Hunt conducted background research on the suspect in an effort to gather more evidence before the trial. Hunt quickly learned of an even more unsettling truth, though she already knew he had served time for abusing another girl in their family. A number of other women who were close to Stanley reported to the police that he had molested them when they were little. He would tell their family that he was temporarily homeless and ask them to let him stay in their house for a while. This pattern was consistent. Stanley used threats to silence the girls when he was left alone with them and carried out his heinous acts. After hearing all of these accounts, the police came to the conclusion that Stanley had been doing this for 30 years. Despite this, Detective Hunt recognized that it would be difficult to convict Stanley of the murder because there were so few clear-cut pieces of evidence, like fingerprints or DNA. She kept working on the case until she came across a box of old files that she had not yet looked through. Examining its contents, Hunt was struck once more with the ineptitude of her predecessor's handling of the case. There was a letter in the box, dated June 26, 2002. The same account, which Hunt heard from the prisoner in Kentucky just 12 years later, was submitted to the authorities by another informant. Stanley had already been incarcerated since the summer of 2002 for attacking a minor relative. He told his cellmate about killing Jessica during that period. The cellmate, who happened to be a police informant, wrote a letter to the department in charge of the case, detailing all of Stanley's heinous crimes against his niece. And what do you think happened? Did the police just disregard the letter, perhaps convinced of Brooks's involvement during those years, and stop looking into other possibilities? Hunt was again displeased with the incompetence of her colleagues. Had they been more diligent in their work, this case might have been resolved in 2002. She could only wait for the trial now, years later, in the hopes that Stanley would at last receive long overdue justice for his deeds. Stanley proclaimed his innocence before the proceedings started in 2015. Jessica's parents were in the courtroom, and they could barely look at the relative who had ruined their lives. And they were angry that he could not just come clean and offer them some sort of resolution. Due to the dearth of strong evidence against him, the prosecution thought there was little chance of getting a guilty verdict on the murder charges. The assault accusations against the other girls in the family presented another issue. The prosecution chose to offer Stanley a plea deal because all of them would have to testify in court and give detailed accounts of what Stanley had done to them. In exchange for Stanley's confession about his assaults on family members and his involvement in Jessica's murder, they agreed to remove the death penalty. Ultimately, he consented and entered a guilty plea. He was not obliged to reveal any particulars about the crimes as part of the agreement. Jessica's parents were unhappy about it because they wanted to know the whole truth, but Stanley had to keep quiet because of the terms of the plea agreement. The murderer was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of release after 15 years. Stanley may be released at age 71, as he was 56 at the time of sentencing. Following the trial, Jessica's father pledged that he would wait for his brother to take matters into his own hands if he did not pass away in jail. In 2019, Stanley denied killing Jessica in his first interview. He said that he had been at work that morning. However, after 20 years, it was impossible to confirm. Furthermore, he was unable to explain how two unconnected informants could have come up with the same tales, including details like a bed linen burial site that the murderer alone knew. Detectives have yet to rule out David Brooks's possible small role in the case. Stanley could have asked for assistance in getting rid of the victim's belongings because Stanley knew him. Brooks may not have fully understood the situation given his low IQ. He may have set the girl's clothes on fire, and Stanley may have given him the gloves that contained the body odor that the dogs had picked up on. He might have left Jessica's picture in Stanley's shed so that it would frame him, The truth, though, might never be known because Brooks passed away in 2021 from cardiac issues. It is important to remember the incident where Jessica's younger brother mistook a cry for assistance outside for his sister on the third day after Jessica vanished. There is still no way to know for sure what transpired at that moment. Stanley was detaining the girl several miles from her residence in the barn, so it is possible that she was still alive. There is a somewhat unlikely possibility, but the child most likely imagined it because they were stressed, or else someone else was screaming. Stanley was probably not far from the house because, as we remember, he drove up just after Jessica's father hurried outside. It is possible that the girl was unconscious or had her mouth taped shut while in his car, but this theory does not seem very likely.